3 girls vanished from their dorm room in 1979. The coffee was still warm, and the mirror was never quite the same. They weren't the kind of girls who ran away. But whatever took them that night didn't leave footprints, just silence. It was just after 7:12 a.m. when the sunlight slid between the blinds of room 319. The dorm hall, tucked at the far end of Westford University's northern residence wing, was unusually quiet for a Thursday. Leaves scraped faintly against the window panes, and the faint hum of campus maintenance trucks echoed somewhere in the distance. The floor's usual bustle, the slamming of showers, the clatter of kettles, the half-mumbled curses over missed alarms was conspicuously absent. It wasn't silence, it was stillness. The kind that sinks into the floorboards. Marcy Keller, the 4th roommate, had woken late. Her alarm had failed to go off again, and she was already muttering under her breath about a failed psychology midterm. Groggy and barefoot, she wandered into the shared kitchenette. The scent of instant coffee still hung in the air, warm and fresh like someone had just brewed it. The pot sat on the burner, half full. 3 chipped mugs rested beside it, one of them still steaming faintly. Before we go deeper into the chilling mystery of the 3 girls who vanished from their dorm room without a trace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring stories like this buried, silenced, and nearly forgotten back into the light. Every click is a step toward truth, and every subscription helps us keep asking the questions no one else will. It's a small gesture, but it means everything. Thank you. Her brow furrowed. She glanced toward the tiny common space, then passed it to the bedroom doors. Lydia's sneakers were still by the door. Mallory's scarf hung over the back of the chair like always, a knitted mess of pink and orange. Joe's leather-bound sketchbook was open on the floor, pages fanned like wings, a charcoal drawing mid-stroke. Marcy called out casually, "Hey, you guys up?" No answer. She opened Lydia and Mallory's shared bedroom door first. Beds made, pillows untouched. Mallory's glasses were still on her desk, neatly folded beside a dog-eared paperback. Lydia's journal was open to a blank page. The pen lay across it, uncapped, a faint black smudge bleeding into the paper. Marcy blinked. Something was wrong. It wasn't just that they weren't there, it was that they'd left nothing out of place. She moved to Joe's room. The same story. Clothes in the laundry hamper, not strewn across the bed. The lamp still on. A record halfway through its side, softly ticking in place with the needle looping through static. Joe never left her music like that. Never. There were no signs of struggle, no broken windows, no torn sheets, not even a scuff on the floor. It was as if they had simply stood up, mid-sentence, mid-breath, and walked out without bothering to close the door behind them. But the door was closed when Marcy woke up, locked, even. She had used her key to open it. Panic didn't hit her all at once. It crawled, slow and gnawing. Maybe they had gone for an early walk, but none of them were morning people. A prank? No one at Westford pulled pranks like that. Marcy sat down on the edge of the couch, staring at the untouched mugs of coffee. The steam from Mallory's cup had only just stopped rising. That meant they were here. Not long ago. She picked up the rotary phone and dialed campus security, voice tight, unsure if she was being paranoid. The words felt ridiculous, even as she said them aloud. 3 girls are missing. No, not for long, but everything's still here. There was a pause on the other end. A sigh. Then a clipped response. "We'll send someone over." It would take 5 hours for anyone to take it seriously. 24 before the campus sent out a memo. 40 years for the truth to come close to the surface. And in that room, even then, the coffee never quite went cold. In the weeks following the disappearance, every drawer, every folder, every tucked-away pocket of room 319 was turned over by campus police, and then again by Detective Mullaney, a man whose tired eyes skimmed details but never felt their weight. Still, It wasn't until the room was sealed and unsealed months later by the university's archiving staff that anyone paid close attention to the corkboard on the back of the common room door. It was the sort of thing you stop seeing when you live with it. Cluttered with receipts, torn-out pages, Polaroids of wine-stained grins, and one yellowing note in smeared black ink that read, "Be back before the moon dies." The handwriting couldn't be matched to any of the three. It wasn't part of an assignment, wasn't on the syllabus, wasn't anything. Just a scrawled sentence, sharp and fast, half-faded. A private joke, a warning? It lingered like a whisper in a hallway noticed only when everything else went quiet. Lydia Reyes was the loudest of the three, though not in volume. She walked through campus like she knew something no one else did. A philosophy major who quoted Camus with a crooked grin and snuck cigarettes behind the humanities building after Vespers. Her mother had died 2 years earlier, and that grief seemed to hover around her like second skin. In her diary, found beneath a loose floorboard, she wrote in lowercase only, "I don't believe in ghosts, but I believe in places that don't let go of you." The last entry was dated 3 days before she vanished. Mallory Kim was precision and polish. A pre-med student who color-coded her lecture notes and spent her Sundays doing laundry at exactly 9 a.m. She was the glue in the group, the one who packed sandwiches for study sessions and reminded them when rent was due. Underneath her bed was a shoebox of childhood drawings, nearly all of them showing rain, rooftops, and a tall figure without a face. Her therapist's business card was taped to the inside of her desk drawer. She had stopped going weeks before the incident. Joe Vasquez rarely spoke unless she was asked to. An art major, she was always sketching napkins, her forearm, the inside covers of library books. Her illustrations were dreamlike. Moons hung upside down, women with mirrors for eyes, trees with blood in their bark. In one corner of her sketchpad, she had drawn a map of what looked like their dorm floor. A red X was marked under their room. Underneath it, the words, "Heart of it all." She never explained it to anyone. The three girls weren't friends in the traditional sense. They hadn't come from the same towns, hadn't taken the same electives, but they found each other quickly. Trauma does that. Lydia's mother. Mallory's silent panic attacks. Joe's weeks spent in a foster center after her grandmother died. There was no need for long explanations between them, only presence. Only shared stillness. In their first-class photo together, all three stood at the back row, shoulders touching, faces unreadable. Behind them on the dorm wall, just barely visible in the background, was the same corkboard. And if you zoomed in, grainy, but there it was, already pinned up. "Be back before the moon dies." No one remembered seeing it pinned. No one could say when it was written. But it was there, before anyone noticed they were gone. In the first few days, the flyers went up fast, grainy black and white headshots with hastily printed contact numbers and the words "missing students" in bold. They were stapled to telephone poles, slid under dorm doors, taped to campus bulletin boards next to club announcements and guitar lesson ads. For a brief moment, Westford held its breath. 3 young women, gone without a trace from their own dorm room. It should have been national news. And for a flicker of time, it was. A local reporter from Channel 8 aired a segment on the second day. The footage was jittery, handheld. Parents standing by the campus gates. A shot of room 319's door, closed tight. Then a voiceover. No evidence of foul play. No signs of forced entry. Police are baffled. By the end of the week, though, the coverage had thinned. A fire at the Millard chemical plant, 2 counties over, swallowed the headlines. The war overseas flared up again. Something newer, louder, always came next. The university, for its part, acted quickly, but not in the way anyone had hoped. An emergency memo was issued to faculty. Avoid speculation, do not encourage rumor. Campus security increased patrols for 2 weeks before quietly reverting to normal hours. The Student Counseling Center extended its drop-in hours for that semester, then scaled back in spring. When students asked questions, they were told not to spread fear. One administrator, when cornered by a group of protesters near the quad, famously muttered, "Let's not make a circus out of tragedy." Classes resumed. Exams came and went. By January, room 319 had been sealed, scrubbed, and reassigned to a pair of second-year transfer students. Neither stayed past midterms. Detective Mullaney filed his final report 6 months later. He cited insufficient evidence, no probable crime scene. A missing persons case, unresolved but inactive. The file was boxed and shelved somewhere in a municipal basement, under a leaky pipe and behind 2 decades worth of parking violations. Still, the story never truly disappeared. It twisted into something else. Locals began to call it the dorm ghost story. It became a favorite among the freshmen passed along during late-night walks back from the library or whispered during stormy nights when the power flickered. Some said you could hear footsteps in the hall when no one was there. Others claimed to have seen 3 shadows moving behind the curtains in room 319, even when it was vacant. The most popular version involved a mirror. Stare into it long enough, they said, and you'd see one of the girls behind you, mouth open in a silent scream. The legends shifted over time, details bending like heat waves. Names were misremembered. The year got pushed back. By the late 82nds, some students thought it was just a campus urban myth cooked up to haze freshmen. By the late 92nds, few remembered the real names at all. But the residents of the town, the bartenders, janitors, and professors who'd stayed never fully forgot. They remembered the missing girls differently. Not as phantoms, but as a chill that hung in the corners of memory. A cold spot in time. A silence no one wanted to touch too closely. Detective Henry Talbot had never been good at letting things go. At 62, with retirement paperwork waiting on his desk, and his wife quietly collecting vacation brochures from the kitchen drawer, he still spent most nights at the precinct, long after the others had gone home. He moved like someone trying not to be noticed, quiet shoes, quiet coffee, quiet sighs, and spent more time in the archives than anyone still drawing a salary. Most of the young officers thought he was just killing time, avoiding the ache of an empty house, or the too loud silence that came with growing old, in a profession that no longer needed you. But Talbot wasn't passing time. He was hunting ghosts. He had made a habit of reopening cold cases, just little ones at first. A missing wedding ring in a nursing home. A vandalized statue no one cared about. A decades-old robbery, solved with a forgotten confession found in a widow's attic. He liked the ones that didn't make noise. No politics, no press. Just dust, memory, and the slow patience of knowing that something lost was never the same as something gone. One night in early March, while combing through an old evidence catalog to digitize files for the department's new system, Talbot came across a misfiled box. It was small, unremarkable, and shoved behind a stack of 1,985 assault reports. On the side, a faded label, WFDORM 79, -3 farads. Curious, he pulled it down. Inside, 3 manila folders, each marked with a name, Reyes, Kim, Vasquez. He paused. Something about it rang a bell, but distantly, like a tune half heard through a wall. He read the intake reports. 3 girls missing. Westford University, October 1979. No sign of forced entry. No evidence of foul play. Case closed due to lack of leads. A single-page summary signed off by Detective Mullaney in April 1980, with the phrase, "presumed runaway event. No further action recommended." That phrase stuck with him. Talbot flipped through the folders again. Photos of the dorm room beds made, coffee cups, a corkboard in the background. All tidy. Too tidy. Then he noticed a curious absence. No witness statements from roommates. No door-to-door interviews. No mention of the tunnel access that ran beneath that wing of the dorms, something Talbot only knew about because of a fire drill mishap back in '86. And one more thing. A photo log showed 22 items collected from the room, but the inventory list only mentioned 18. No explanation. He sat back in the archive chair, box open on his lap, and let out a long breath. It wasn't the case that drew him in. It was the silence around it. The lack of chaos. Missing girls usually left behind broken pieces, arguments, signs of struggle, someone shouting, someone crying. But this file read like a vacuum, as if the event had been swallowed before anyone could name it. That night, Talbot brought the box home. Not standard procedure. But he had always followed his own rules, especially near the end. He didn't tell his wife. Just stayed up until dawn, reading those 3 folders over and over, each time slower than the last, until he wasn't sure if he was investigating something real, or slipping into a story that had been waiting 25 years for someone to listen. The old dormitory building had a new name now, Whitaker Hall, its updated bronze plaque proclaiming it a Center for Academic Affairs and Faculty Development. But Talbot could still see the bones. The arched entryway was the same, just buffed and painted. The third-floor hallway, where the girls had once lived, had been polished and retrofitted with soft LED ceiling panels and eco-friendly carpet tiles that muffled every footstep. It was sterile, brighter, too clean. But beneath all the renovations, the layout hadn't changed. The hallway still curved slightly to the left, and room 319 still sat tucked at the end, now marked storage, archives only. Talbot stood in the hallway for a long time, as if waiting for something to stir from behind the door. He had pulled strings to get access to the building, a favor from a friend in city planning who owed him for a lost weekend in Atlantic City. He wasn't supposed to be there alone, but Talbot had a badge, a name, and that kind of voice that made people move out of his way without quite knowing why. He walked slowly, touching the walls now and then with the flat of his hand, like a blind man mapping memory. Every so often, he stopped to listen. Room 319 was locked. He didn't have a key. He didn't try to force it open. Instead, he wandered downstairs to the maintenance wing tucked behind the basement's boiler system. The air smelled like mildew and soldered pipe. That's where he found Carl Dempsey, the longest-serving member of the university's facilities crew. Balding, stooped, and sipping from a thermos, Carl had a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile properly but hadn't stopped trying. Talbot asked him about the 3rd floor. No reaction. Then he asked about the renovations, specifically anything done between 1979 and 1981. Carl looked up, blinking slowly. "Why you asking?" Talbot told him, carefully, about the box, the missing girls, and the dorm room that had become a storage closet. He didn't mention the note on the corkboard. He didn't have to. Carl scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "Yeah, we did something up there. Early '80. Coldest January I ever worked through. They called us in to do subfloor work in 319, and the room next to it. Didn't say why. Just that there was damage to the joists. Thing is," he trailed off, eyes drifting, "there wasn't any damage. No water, no rot. Joists looked fine to me, but we were told to replace the section anyway. Tear it out, lay new beams, pour concrete filler, then seal the whole damn thing with resin. No carpet, just tile over it." Talbot narrowed his eyes. "Was there access underneath?" Carl nodded slowly. "Trap panel. Every room on that floor had one. Just small access hatches for wiring. Except after that job, 319 didn't. They told us to fill it in. Like they wanted it gone." He gave Talbot a long, searching look. "Funny thing? One of the guys who worked with me that day swore he saw something under the panel. Said it looked like a pit or tunnel. Didn't go down, just said it smelled like burnt candles and, I don't know. Chalk, dry rot, something old." Carl shook his head and sipped from his thermos again. "Didn't make sense then, still doesn't. But we did what we were told. Talbot left the basement with his hands in his coat pockets, and the old floor plan burned into his mind. There was something beneath room 319, something that had been sealed up, tiled over, and forgotten. But memory has weight, and some floors remember exactly what's been buried under them. It was raining the day Talbot returned to Whitaker Hall with a crowbar in his trunk, and a vague promise to himself that he wouldn't break anything he couldn't fix. The building was mostly empty. Faculty offices closed early on Fridays, and no one from maintenance paid attention to an aging detective who knew how to walk like he belonged. By the time he reached the third floor, his shoes left faint prints on the freshly waxed tiles, and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead sounded louder than it should have. Room 319 stared back at him like a sealed crypt. The door was still locked, but it wasn't the door Talbot was interested in anymore. He remembered the photo, the old one from the case file. The corkboard on the wall, the air vent just above it. In the newer photos from the renovation records, that vent was still there. Same size, same spot. And now, standing directly in front of it, Talbot could see the screws had been turned once, maybe twice, since the last coat of paint. Subtle scraping at the edges. Someone had opened it before. Someone had put something inside. He didn't pry it open right away. First, he listened. The hallway was quiet, save for the occasional creak of building bones settling. Then, slowly, with the kind of practiced care that came from decades of knowing how not to make noise, he unscrewed the vent panel. Inside was dust, lots of it, spiderwebs clinging to the inner edges, strands like faded thread. He reached in, fingers brushing across a brittle envelope that crackled like dry leaves. Carefully, reverently, he pulled it out. The envelope was yellowed and unsealed. On the front, in slanted black ink, "To whoever's still looking." He opened it. The letter inside was written in uneven handwriting, a little rushed, a little shaky. The kind of penmanship that happens when you're writing in a hurry or while scared. No date, no signature. Just lines that unfolded like a confession and a warning. "We didn't mean to break it, the mirror. It wasn't supposed to do anything, it was just a game. But Jo kept saying she saw something. Not herself, something behind herself. She said it had her eyes but not her thoughts." Lydia didn't believe it until the night she touched the glass, and her hand didn't come back right away. There's something wrong with that room. It listens, it learns, it waits. And when it knows you well enough, it shows you the second face. We tried to stop it. We burned the circle, we scattered the salt. But it was already in the walls. We could hear it moving sometimes. Not footsteps, breathing. If you're reading this, don't try to open it again. Whatever we let in, it never left. Talbot stared at the final line for a long time. Then he read it again. And again. The letter was unsigned, but he knew it was Jo. The language, the imagery, it matched the sketches in her old journal. The mirror, the second face. Words that meant nothing to the original investigation, but now pulsed with cold weight. He folded the letter gently, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it inside his coat. The hallway felt different now. He glanced once at the vent, now gaping like a quiet mouth, and then down the corridor toward the exit. But before he walked away, he looked back at room 319 one last time. And in the flicker of the overhead light, he swore for just a second the reflection in the vent's metal frame didn't match the way he was standing. Lydia Reyes first heard about the mirror game during her freshman year, late one night in the library archives when she should have been studying for a philosophy midterm. It was buried in a threadbare student zine from 1966, typed unevenly, and filled with campus gossip and pseudoscience. There, in the middle of an article about dorm hauntings and spiritual awakenings, was a paragraph that read like a dare. "Stand before the mirror after midnight. Light one candle. Look into your eyes, not your face. If you stare long enough, you'll see the version of you that watches back. The one that remembers everything you've tried to forget. She tore the page out and folded it into her notebook. At first, it was just a curiosity. Lydia was the kind of girl who poked at things just to see if they'd bleed. Philosophy major, grief-ridden, reckless in ways that didn't look reckless from the outside. She wore her mother's ring on a chain, and sometimes spoke about death with the casualness of someone trying to desensitize herself. The mirror game, to her, wasn't scary. It was a question. What if the mind could be peeled back like skin? What if memory had a shadow? She told Mallory and Joe about it one night as they sat cross-legged on the dorm floor, passing around a half-finished bottle of peach schnapps and listening to a rainstorm beat against the windows. "It's probably just pareidolia," Mallory muttered, flipping through a textbook. "You stare too long, your brain gets bored and makes shit up." Lydia smirked. "So let's make shit up together." Joe didn't say anything at first. She was sketching again, the candlelight flickering over her page. Her charcoal drawings had become more abstract, lately less anatomy studies, more strange symbols and faceless women. She looked up and said quietly, "What if it's not you you're seeing?" Lydia grinned, loving every minute of it. That night, they tried it. Just the once. They turned off the dorm lights, lit a single candle, and took turns sitting in front of the old vanity mirror that had come with the room. Mallory lasted 30 seconds before scoffing and walking away. Joe watched longer, eyes unblinking, until she frowned and sketched something in the corner of her notebook. Lydia, though Lydia stayed. She stared for nearly 10 minutes, motionless. Her face looked pale, stretched thin by candlelight, her eyes locked onto themselves like they were trying to look past the glass. When she finally stood up, she didn't say a word. Over the next few weeks, she grew distant, distracted. She taped a small mirror inside her closet and began staring at it in the mornings, claiming she was practicing. Mallory found her one night, murmuring something in Latin, words pulled from a philosophy text that had nothing to do with spirituality and everything to do with identity. "You're being weird," Mallory told her. "We're all weird," Lydia replied. "I'm just honest about it." The last entry in her journal, scribbled and nearly illegible, simply read, "It blinked." Joe found it the morning after. The mirror, still warm from Lydia's touch, held no reflection when Joe looked into it. Just candlelight. And something else, something small and fast that moved across the glass like it lived on the other side. They never played the game again. But Lydia did, alone, again and again. Until, one night, she didn't come back. Talbot had spent most of the week buried in the city records annex, a place that smelled like forgotten air and old toner. Rows of gray filing cabinets stretched into dim corners, and the flickering overhead light made it feel more like a mausoleum than a municipal office. He combed through decades of university-related reports, most of them dull complaints about vandalized statues, petty theft, and noise violations. But tucked between two faded property damage files dated November 1979, he found a memo that made him stop cold. It was a copy badly scanned, half the words smudged but still legible enough to recognize. A short internal note from a junior records clerk to someone in precinct administration. Received supplemental suspect profile filed by Det. Mulaney Re. Westford disappearance case WFDORM 79-3 Farids. Filing delayed pending supervisor sign-off. Please advise on retention. The note was dated 2 weeks after the girls had vanished. Talbot's stomach sank. There had been no suspect report in the box, no follow-up, no leads of any kind, officially. This memo suggested there had been something, and that it had been pulled or never logged properly at all. He tried the digital archive next. Nothing. The folder for WFDO, RM, 7-9-3 Farids had one entry, the final report. No trace of a suspect profile, no chain of custody. Just a polite notation, case closed due to lack of evidence. That night, Talbot drove out to the edge of town where Mulaney now lived, a small ranch house with an overgrown lawn and a rusted mailbox that leaned forward like it had given up. Mulaney was in his 80s now, thin and bent, with eyes that held more sleep than memory. His wife answered the door, her mouth tight with the kind of caution that comes from years of watching a man live with ghosts. She let Talbot in without much small talk. They sat in the den, surrounded by books that hadn't been touched in years, a black and white television still showing the news on mute. Talbot didn't ask nicely. He didn't need to. He placed the printed memo on the table and slid it across. Mulaney stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he leaned back, exhaled, and rubbed both hands down his face. "I figured this would come back up someday," he said, voice hoarse. Talbot kept his eyes steady. Why was it erased? Mulaney didn't answer right away. His fingers trembled as they reached for a lukewarm glass of water. "Because we were told to forget," he said finally. "We weren't allowed to dig." "Who told you?" "The school, city. I don't know who exactly. It came from above. I filed that suspect report. I named someone. A faculty member, man with a reputation for strange things. Rumors about seances, about students getting involved in things they didn't understand." He swallowed hard, eyes glossing with something too old to be fresh grief. "The next day, my report was gone. My captain told me to sign off, said it was a runaway case, that if I kept pushing, I'd lose my badge." Talbot sat in silence. Mulaney looked up, pleading now. "I saw what was in that room, Henry. Not just what was there, what wasn't, the absence. It felt like walking into something that had already decided not to let you leave. I've never been the same." Talbot took the memo, folded it carefully, and stood to go. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the leaves in the trees. For the first time in a long while, Talbot felt the familiar grip of something too big to name tightening around the edges of his investigation. And it wasn't just a missing report anymore. It was permission. Permission that had been revoked. The name appeared like a crack in old paint, something barely visible, almost accidental. Talbot had been cross-referencing university housing records from 1979, going line by line through the registrar's microfilm scans, when he noticed a withdrawal form dated the 10th of October. The document was incomplete, the signature hurried. It belonged to a student named Rachel Lively, who had been assigned to room 319 for the fall semester. She'd dropped out exactly 1 week before Lydia, Mallory, and Joe vanished. Rachel's name had never appeared in the police report, in any witness statements, or even in the archived memos Talbot had combed through. It was as if her presence had been erased, or more likely, ignored. Her name wasn't on any flyers. There was no attempt to contact her after the fact. Talbot felt a chill crawl up his back as he stared at the screen. A fourth girl. One who left before whatever happened. It took 2 days of digging and a few calls to a friend in Social Security records to find her. Rachel Lively had changed her name to Rachel Elwood in 1984. She now lived in a small town in Vermont, population under 1,000. No social media, no digital footprint, just a P.O. box, an outdated landline, and a house address listed off a winding wooded road just outside the Green Mountains. Talbot made the drive on a gray morning thick with fog. As the miles passed and the signal bars on his phone disappeared, he couldn't shake the weight pressing on his chest. There was something in the timing, how neatly Rachel had stepped out of the room before the others were pulled into whatever had claimed them. Coincidence didn't sit right with him, not anymore. Her house was a squat, weathered place with a slanted porch and wind chimes that clinked with a metallic, off-key tune. The lawn was overgrown, and a rusted windmill creaked in the backyard. When she answered the door, Rachel looked older than her 44 years, thin, pale, with hair that had gone gray early and deep lines etched across her brow. But her eyes were sharp. Watchful. I'm not interested in religion, donations, or politics, she said. Talbot held up his badge, then lowered it slowly. I'm here about Westford, 1979. Room 319. She froze. The screen door between them didn't move, but something in her body did a silent retreat that no feet had taken. For a long moment, she didn't speak. I left, she said finally, voice thin and cracked. I left before it got bad. I knew I had to. Why? Rachel opened the door just enough to step out. She didn't invite him in. There was a game, Lydia found it. A mirror thing. At first it was funny, just spooky nonsense. But then Joe stopped sleeping. Mallory said she was hearing voices herself, but not herself. And Lydia. She trailed off. She started changing, not how she looked, just how she was. Like something else was borrowing her, piece by piece. I saw it first. I don't think she knew. Talbot waited. Rachel stared at the trees behind him. The night I left, I woke up to Lydia whispering in front of the mirror. I couldn't see her face, just her reflection. And the reflection looked at me before she turned. Her voice trembled. Only the reflection turned. She finally met his gaze. I don't know what happened after I left, but I know this room, 319, isn't haunted. It's hungry. And if you're smart detective, you'll stop feeding it. Rachel didn't want to talk at first. Even after bringing Talbot into the house, a dim, quiet space, filled with books and thick curtains that kept the light out, she paced like she was waiting for the walls to close in. But something in her had been waiting, too. All these years, the memory had sat at the base of her spine like a stone, never fully buried. And now that someone else had come asking, she couldn't stop the words from tumbling out. It wasn't a club, she said, sitting across from Talbot at a wooden kitchen table marked with old cigarette burns. We never gave it a name, nothing official. But it felt private. Sacred, almost. Like the kind of thing you didn't tell anyone about because it would lose power if you did. She sipped her tea with trembling hands and stared out the window, not looking at him. Lydia was the one who started it. She called them thin places. Places where the world was stretched too tight like fabric pulled over something sharp. She believed there were spots where the boundaries between life and death, memory and time, didn't quite hold. Talbot didn't interrupt. He just let the silence carry her forward. Lydia found something in the basement of the library, Rachel continued. Not a book. A journal, old. Unlabeled. Handwritten pages about rituals. Doors that weren't doors. Ways to move through grief, like it was a hallway you could walk if you knew where to place your feet. She paused. Lydia thought it made sense. She'd lost her mother the year before. She never talked about it straight, just in metaphors. But this gave her something to do with the pain. Joe was the first to believe her. She was always chasing meaning through art, through symbols. Mallory came later, skeptical, but loyal. And Rachel. Rachel had wanted to belong, even when it felt like the ground was shifting underneath them. It started as meditation, she said. Visualization, breathing, that kind of thing. Then rituals. Little ones, circles of salt. Whispering into mirrors. Staying silent for hours in the dark, to let the veil thin. We didn't think it was real, not really. But we felt something. The air got thick. Time moved strange. We started dreaming the same dreams. Then Rachel's voice lowered. Lydia said there was a place beneath the dorm. Not metaphorically, literally beneath it. A hollow, an old room or tunnel that had been sealed off. She believed that was the heart of the thinness. That if we reached it, we could step through, not die, not go to heaven or hell, just slip out of the pain. Rewrite the story. They made a pact, the four of them, one last ritual, one final attempt to reach it. I bailed, Rachel said. I was too scared, something felt wrong. I woke up with scratches I couldn't explain. I saw Jo talking to herself in a voice that wasn't hers. Mallory started writing backwards. Lydia had nosebleeds for days. I didn't think it would stop. I begged them to stop. They just smiled. She pressed her palms together to still the shaking. The night they disappeared, they planned to open it. They told me to come. I said no. They said they'd come back with proof, that I'd understand when I saw it. She looked Talbot dead in the eye. They never came back, and I never slept in a room with a mirror again. The map was wedged between two brittle pages in Jo's sketchbook, folded unevenly and smudged with graphite fingerprints. Talbot hadn't noticed it the first time he flipped through. The drawings were so dense, so chaotic. He'd overlooked what at first glance looked like more of her abstract illustrations. But now, under proper light, and with a detective's practiced patience, the details sharpened. Lines representing corridors, arrows, crude notations in the margins, old vent access. No light passed here. 319 above, and, scrawled near the bottom in thick black charcoal, the mouth. It wasn't labeled as a map, but Talbot knew what he was looking at. He recognized the layout of the dorm wing, at least the surface-level version of it. But this was deeper, beneath. The tunnels had always been part of campus folklore, mentioned offhand by retired maintenance men and curious engineering students. Steam tunnels, they called them. Leftover veins from a century ago, when the college had heated itself with boilers and copper pipe. Most had been sealed off or filled with concrete by the late 72nds, or so the records claimed. But Jo had drawn something no records ever included. An access point behind the old laundry room. A crawl space under the west stairwell. And deep within it, a chamber marked with a red X and a single word beneath. Door. Talbot waited until dusk before he returned to Whitaker Hall. No one stopped him. Faculty had long since gone home, and the new security guard recognized him from earlier visits, said nothing. Talbot carried a duffel bag with a flashlight, gloves, a small crowbar, and Jo's map. He moved quickly, methodically, down to the sub-basement through an old stairwell, now labeled maintenance only. The smell hit him first: rust, mildew, something faintly sweet and sickly. The wall behind the laundry unit was exactly as Jo had drawn, plaster patched clumsily over brick. Talbot knocked and heard it, the hollow echo of a space on the other side. It took 10 minutes to chip through the plaster. Behind it, a rusted access panel, screwed tight but still intact. He opened it. A rush of stale air met him, thick, metallic, like the breath of something that had waited too long to exhale. The tunnel was narrow, damp, and sloped slightly downward. Pipes ran along the ceiling like ribs. His flashlight beam jittered over the walls, revealing old graffiti and chalk markings. Some childish, others unsettling symbols he couldn't place. Spirals and mirrored numbers, words written backwards. He walked deeper. At a fork, just as the map showed, the path veered left into a low arch. Beyond it, the tunnel widened into a round chamber, an old maintenance node, or maybe a forgotten junction. The walls were covered in carvings, not graffiti, carvings. Hundreds of them. Not random organized. Symbols. Faces without eyes. Doors etched over and over, sometimes open, sometimes sealed. And on the far wall, drawn in something that looked darker than charcoal and thicker than ink, was a mirror roughly shaped, jagged at the edges, but unmistakable. Beneath it, a phrase etched deep into the concrete. The second face is patient. Then Talbot heard it. Not footsteps, not breathing, a sound like scraping glass. Behind him, in the pitch-dark corridor he'd already passed, something shifted. Something slow. He turned off his flashlight and listened. Nothing moved. For now. Talbot returned 2 days later with a court order and a crew from the city's forensic unit. It wasn't easy. Westford University resisted fiercely, citing historical preservation, safety hazards, and jurisdictional red tape. But Talbot had the weight of silence on his side, and when silence stacks too high, it tends to collapse. The tunnel entrance was widened, lights strung up, and the carved chamber documented in full. What they found next was further in past the mirror etching, behind a false wall sealed with decades-old brickwork. The chamber beyond was colder, not from the earth, but from something else. The air didn't move. The smell hit immediately. Ash and lavender, an impossible combination. Ash, sharp and bitter, like something burned long ago and never fully stopped smoldering. Lavender, faint and floral, as though someone had tried to mask the truth with something delicate. Or perhaps the truth had tried to mask itself. They broke through the last layer of stone and stepped inside. It wasn't a large space, maybe 10 feet by 8, low-ceilinged and suffocating. At the center, partially collapsed, was what had once been a circle drawn on the floor, faded wax lines. Salt scattered to the edges. Around it, fragments of charred wood and melted metal. And there, beneath the debris, the unmistakable remains of a fire that had burned too hot in a place without air. Bones, blackened and brittle. A tangle of fabric, melted and stuck to what remained of a ribcage. And shards of mirror, some fused to the stone, others twisted into shapes that reflected nothing true. Talbot didn't speak. He just stood in the doorway and stared, the smell of lavender and smoke clinging to the back of his throat. A part of him had expected this, another part had hoped the tunnel would end in nothing. But here it was, not a metaphor, not a ghost story, a grave. They catalogued everything. The bones were sent for testing. The clothing, though burned, was unmistakably from the late 72nd synthetic fibers, polyester blends, familiar patterns. One shirt still held a scorched tag, Westford University Bookstore, 1978. There was no question anymore. The girls hadn't vanished into thin air. They'd been buried under the school the whole time. A week later, the DNA results came in. 2 confirmed matches, Lydia Reyes and Mallory Kim. But Joe Vasquez remains weren't among them. At first, Talbot considered that her body might have been destroyed completely. The fire had been intense, but the pattern of the remains, the placement, the arrangement suggested otherwise. 2 sets of bones, 2 spaces, 2 victims. Joe had been there that night. And then she hadn't. That absence screamed louder than anything else. Because now the question wasn't just what happened to them. It was where Joe had gone, and why the only trace she left behind was her reflection, etched into the back of a melted mirror shard, twisted as if still watching. Talbot took it with him, that shard. Slipped it into an evidence bag and stored it separately from the others. Because when he looked into it, he didn't see himself. He saw a candle, still burning, somewhere deep, somewhere waiting. The tip came from an orderly in a quiet northern care facility 2 states over. A woman, mid-40s, nonverbal, had been admitted under emergency psychiatric hold in 1981 and never left. No records of family, no visitors, no legal name confirmed. She had been listed as Jane Doe 1123 for over 2 decades, known only to staff as Ruth, a name given by the nurse who first admitted her. The orderly, a young intern flipping through old patient art journals for a case study, had noticed something strange. Over and over, across years of sketchbooks and scrap paper, one face appeared again and again. Same eyes, same slope of cheek, same half smile. Different clothes, different settings, but always her. It looked like a student ID photo, or a memory that wouldn't die. When Talbot saw the images, he didn't need to check the file twice. It was Lydia. He drove through the night, wind roaring against the car windows as he crossed state lines. The facility was quiet, almost too peaceful, perched in a wooded grove surrounded by deer fences and old security cameras that no longer worked. Inside, the halls were wide and washed in soft yellow lighting, the kind meant to calm instead of illuminate. They brought him to her room, room 213. The door was open. Inside, the woman sat on a bench beneath the window, eyes fixed on the tree outside. She was drawing again, charcoal pencil, moving slowly, deliberately, across cheap sketch paper. There was no hesitation in her movements, only ritual. Talbot watched her for a moment before stepping inside. "Joe?" he asked gently. She didn't react. He knelt beside her, keeping his distance, and placed a copy of Lydia's photo from the university archives onto the bench between them. The woman's hand froze. Her eyes flicked down. Then, slowly, she reached for the paper, not the photo, and began to draw again, this time faster. The same face. Again. Then another. Then the same face, with a mirror behind it. When he asked the doctors about her history, they had little to give. She had been found wandering barefoot near the edge of a train yard in November 1980, mumbling nonsense, covered in ash and with blood under her fingernails. She hadn't spoken a full sentence since. Attempts at identification failed. She refused most food unless it was placed silently beside her. She had a particular aversion to reflective surfaces. Every mirror in her room had to be covered or removed. But her art told stories. It filled volumes. Not just Lydia, there were images of tunnels, of symbols Talbot recognized from the chamber wall, of eyes staring out of candlelit rooms. One sketchbook held a drawing of room 319's layout, near perfect in scale, with a single word scrawled above it, "Beneath." She had been there. She had seen what happened. Or been taken by it. When Talbot gently asked what happened to Mallory, to Lydia, she said nothing. But her hand began to tremble, and she drew a mirror cracking down the middle, one side showing Lydia's face, the other, a blurred shape with hollow eyes. He left that night with copies of her drawings and the undeniable truth that Joe Vasquez hadn't disappeared. She had stayed. And something had followed her out. Talbot had never believed in conspiracies, not the outlandish ones, anyway. But he'd learned over the years that institutions protect themselves with a kind of ruthless elegance. It wasn't about shadowy cabals or secret meetings in candlelit rooms. It was about paperwork, about who signed what and when, and how easily the truth could be rewritten into something safer. Something quieter. He found the minutes buried in the university archives, mislabeled under Budget Committee, Q2 1980. It was only by chance or obsession that he even requested the file. It came in a yellowing manila folder, brittle at the edges. Inside, the official transcript of a closed-door board meeting dated the 13th of March, 1980, just months after the disappearance of Lydia, Mallory, and Joe. At first, the conversation was standard fare. Endowment adjustments, faculty grants, renovations. But halfway through, Talbot caught a shift in tone, a series of lines redacted with black marker, though the handwriting in the margins betrayed what had once been there. One name stood out: Professor Alden Keyes, an obscure lecturer in the philosophy department, terminated abruptly in early 1980. The notes next to his name referenced unauthorized spiritual experimentation, student involvement, and potential media complications. Another section, more chilling, discussed the allocation of discretionary funds, what the board chair euphemistically referred to as containment resources. The numbers were vague, but the intent was clear. Payoffs to silence students, reassign faculty, and quietly shutter room 319's wing under the guise of asbestos concerns. Then came the line that made Talbot's stomach knot. The narrative will focus on psychological instability, likely latent. Emphasize pre-existing emotional issues in all 3 students. Recommend cooperation with campus health services to support this framing. They hadn't just ignored the truth, they had fabricated its replacement. Talbot sat in his car outside the administration building for nearly an hour after reading it. Rain fell in thin sheets, blurring the world beyond the windshield. In his lap, the folder felt heavier than paper should. Not because it was damning, though it was, but because it confirmed what he'd already begun to suspect. The university had known. Not the details, perhaps not the symbols carved in stone or the mirror that didn't reflect true, but they had known something had happened in room 319. Something unnatural, dangerous. And instead of facing it, they chose the path every powerful institution takes when faced with uncertainty. Silence, spin, and erasure. When he tried to access the original personnel file on Professor Keyes, he found it locked under restricted access. No reason given. The digital entry simply read, "Record expunged. By order of Provost, 1980. He dug deeper and found that Keyes had left the state within weeks of his dismissal. No forwarding address, no academic citations beyond 1979. He'd vanished as thoroughly as the girls had, only his disappearance had been arranged, not inflicted. Talbot photocopied everything. He began drafting a report that night, pages spread across his living room floor like a crime scene. He included Rachel's testimony, the photos from the tunnel, Joe's drawings, the sealed minutes, every missing piece now, forming a mosaic of intentional forgetting. But what haunted him most wasn't the cover-up. It was the knowledge that they hadn't buried the truth because they didn't believe it. They buried it because they did. The box was mislabeled again. That was becoming a pattern. Talbot found it buried in the back of the campus storage facility, a gray metal filing cabinet hidden behind broken chairs and outdated AV carts stacked like coffins. The label on the drawer read, "Spring Concert, Audio Archives 1977-1980, and most of the tapes inside were exactly that. Scratchy recordings of choir performances, student recitals, and the occasional speech from a board administrator. But halfway through the stack, he found one without a label. Just a cassette, black plastic, no writing, no case. As if someone had slipped it into the archive with the quiet hope it would stay forgotten. Talbot took it home. He didn't have a proper tape deck anymore, who did? But after digging through his garage, he unearthed an old portable recorder with corroded batteries and a half-melted speaker. He cleaned the contacts, crossed his fingers, and hit play. Static, then a low hum, and then a voice. It was unmistakably Lydia. Not a scream, not a confession. Just her voice, soft and calm, almost careful in the way she shaped each word. The background was silent, no wind, no music, just the quiet click of her lips between lines. She was reading something, a poem maybe, or a letter never meant to be sent. This is for the ones who keep the silence. For the windows that never open, the doors that remember your touch. This is for the rooms that forget the sound of your name. Talbot leaned closer, heart in his throat. There is a place where silence sings, where it hums behind the eyes, and whispers bloom like bruises on the inside of your skull. We went there once. We thought we could carry the pain like a lantern. We thought it would light the way. Her voice trembled on the last word, not from fear, but something stranger like awe. But there are things under the earth that do not sleep. They do not speak. They remember. The recording crackled again. A long pause followed. Talbot thought it might have ended. Then her voice returned, lower now, almost inaudible. If you find this, don't look in the mirror too long. Don't listen when it calls you by name. Some reflections are just waiting for permission. The tape ended with a click. He played it again. And again. Each time, the words felt heavier, like something spoken across time with purpose. Not just art, not just pain, a warning. A marker on the path that Lydia knew someone might one day follow. Talbot copied the tape to digital, but he kept the original. Locked it in his desk drawer next to the mirror shard from the tunnel, Joe's sketchbook, and the campus minutes from 1980. His evidence pile had grown strange, a mix of bureaucratic denial and ghostly fingerprints. But the voice on that tape, that was real. And somewhere beneath the poetry, beneath the metaphors and careful lines, Lydia had told the truth. Maybe not all of it, but enough. There was a place where silence sings. And she had gone there. With her eyes open. It had taken Talbot nearly 6 months to gather everything. The testimonies, the sketches, the minutes from the board, the tunnel map, the broken mirror shard, and the cassette tape where Lydia spoke like a girl, already half gone. Each piece had floated in its own silence, incomplete and surreal. But now, back in his study, surrounded by piles of photocopied records and Joe's trembling charcoal drawings, he began to see it, not the answer, but the shape of it, the arc, the night everything changed. He imagined it unfolding like a film, slow and dreamlike, all candlelight and whispering shadows. It was the 17th of October 1979, a Wednesday. Campus quiet, with midterms over and Halloween still weeks away. Students shuffled to sleep early or stumbled through parties 2 dorms over. But in room 319, something older was stirring. Lydia had let it. That much was clear. The voice on the tape had been hers, measured and mournful. She believed in the thin places, not just as a theory, but as a promise. And she believed that if they could find the door, open it, even briefly, they could cross the threshold between memory and pain. Undo the things that hurt, unlive the things they couldn't forget. Talbot pictured them preparing the ritual with nervous hands and half-belief, Joe sketching symbols on the floor. Mallory, skeptical but loyal, lighting the candles with her jaw clenched. Lydia setting the mirror at the center of the room, cleaned and angled to reflect not the ceiling, but the floor, the circle drawn in chalk, the salt arranged precisely, the sigils borrowed from the strange journal she found in the library's forgotten shelves. 4 girls had made the pact, but only 3 stood there that night. Rachel had already left. Maybe that's why it failed. Or maybe it was never meant to succeed at all. They must have begun just after midnight. Lydia, reciting the lines, voice trembling as belief and fear tangled in her throat. Joe's eyes wide, fixated on the mirror. Mallory clutching a locket that had once belonged to her sister, lost to the kind of grief no one ever really talks about. Talbot imagined the shift, barely perceptible at first. A change in the air pressure. The candle flames stilling, not flickering. The mirror darkening, not from smoke or light, but from something behind it. Something looking back. Then the mistake. A foot nudged the salt. A word mispronounced. A reflection held too long. Something answered. Something that didn't belong in the room, but knew it had been invited. Talbot thought of the melted floor. The scorched bones. The smell of lavender clinging to the tunnel's air like perfume applied to the dead. 2 girls consumed, 1 girl vanished. And Joe, who had run, survived, but left pieces of herself behind. Her voice, her sanity, her silence. He sketched the final moment in his notes like an investigator outlining a crime scene. The circle broken, the mirror shattering. The scream that never made it past the walls. Then silence, long and absolute. Whatever they reached for, whatever door they cracked open, it didn't close all the way. Talbot looked at his desk, at all the pieces, and realized something that chilled him more than anything else. They hadn't made a mistake. They had succeeded. The ritual worked. And the terrible cost was not in its failure, but in its fulfillment. The press conference was held in a rented community hall across from the police precinct. No university insignias, no official backing. Just Henry Talbot standing behind a folding table stacked with photocopies, transcripts, a tape recorder, and 1 fragile envelope marked evidence, Wovderm 79-3 farads. His badge was gone by then. He'd handed in his retirement papers 2 days before. Not quietly. Not ceremoniously. There had been arguments behind closed doors, threats, warnings, but he was done playing quiet. He told them everything. He spoke calmly, without drama, laying out the timeline piece by piece. The missing girls, the misfiled report, the hidden tunnel, The bones beneath the dorm. The psychiatric patient who had once been Joe Vasquez. The sealed board minutes. The poem Lydia had recorded on cassette like a message to the future. The mirror. The smell of lavender. The silence no one had dared break for 25 years. Then he played the tape. Lydia's voice echoed through the speakers in that cheap community room, soft and haunting. A place where silence sings. A door that doesn't close. It wasn't enough to convince everyone, but it was enough to plant the seed. Within days, the university filed a lawsuit. They accused him of theft, slander, unauthorized access to protected property. They claimed the entire story was a fabrication, a grieving man's descent into obsession. Their official statement referred to the original case as a tragic and unresolved incident, made worse by a former officer's misguided personal theories. But Talbot didn't back down. He uploaded the full report online. Every page, every drawing, every taped interview. He sent copies to journalists, podcast hosts, late-night radio shows. At first, it was the fringe circles that took notice, the ones who talked about hauntings and government cover-ups. But then something changed. People began to remember. A retired janitor came forward first. Said he'd been paid cash to help seal a tunnel under Whitaker Hall in 1980. He remembered the bricks being delivered at night. He remembered the smell. Then, a former teaching assistant. She had worked under Professor Alden Keyes the semester before the girls vanished. She recalled a private study group, small, exclusive, girls only. Keyes called them his candle readers. She'd thought it was harmless at the time. Quirky. She hadn't thought about it in decades. Then came the archivist. She produced a memo she'd kept tucked inside an old Latin primer. It mentioned a restricted collection being removed from the library's basement shelves in late 1979, one that included ritual folklore and unauthorized student borrowings. It had been flagged for destruction. She'd found the slip, years later, and kept it. It felt wrong to throw it away, she said. Piece by piece, the silence cracked. The university denied everything, of course. They always would. But beneath the denial was a nervousness Talbot recognized from years of interviews. The shuffle of papers. The avoidance of direct questions. The flicker in the eyes when someone knows the truth but can't admit it aloud. The story couldn't be buried anymore. Too many voices had begun to hum in unison. Broken, hesitant, imperfect but rising. Talbot, watching it all from his quiet home, knew he'd never be hailed as a hero. That wasn't the point. The truth didn't need a champion. It just needed to breathe. And now, after a quarter-century underground, it had taken its first breath. The mirror was found during a routine inventory sweep in the university's off-site storage facility. One of those cement bunkers, miles from campus, packed with rusting desks, unused lab equipment, and forgotten furniture too sentimental or inconvenient to throw away. The item log called it dorm vanity, damaged. No date of intake, no reference number. Just a note, origin unknown, possibly room 319. Talbot got the call from a junior archivist who had been following the story quietly online. She said she recognized it from one of the old photos he'd published. Joe's sketchbook on the floor, the mirror leaning against the wall, candlelight casting shadows just beyond its frame. That same shape, that same ornate edge. He drove there himself. The mirror had been wrapped in a stained white sheet and shoved behind a stack of broken filing cabinets. When Talbot peeled the cloth away, he had to fight the instinct to recoil. It was still whole mostly. A long, jagged crack ran from the top left corner down through the center, like a bolt of lightning frozen in glass. Dust coated its surface, but beneath that, the glass shimmered faintly, too clean in places. As if it had been touched, as if it had been used. There were smudges, fresh ones. The mirror had been looked into. He asked the staff who'd handled the storage room. None admitted to anything, but a maintenance log revealed a door had been found ajar the previous weekend. Nothing reported stolen, nothing broken. Just an open door. Talbot didn't say a word. He loaded the mirror into the back of his car and drove home without turning on the radio. That night, he placed it upright in his study, leaning it against the wall beside Joe's sketches and the now digital waveform of Lydia's voice. He stood across the room and stared at it, half expecting something to shift behind the crack, some flicker of movement just outside his peripheral vision. But it stayed still. He sat for hours, the house dark except for a single lamp behind him. Occasionally, he'd glance at the mirror, half daring himself to walk toward it, to look straight in. But he didn't. Not yet. The next morning, he called in one last favor. A technician from the university's forensic lab arrived with a fingerprint kit. She dusted the edges, the base, the glass. Carefully, professionally. She found 3 sets of partials. 2 belonged to the warehouse staff. The third didn't match anyone in the system. It was small, likely female, recent. That night, Talbot sat across from the mirror again, watching himself watch himself. The crack split his reflection, bending the room around him. Behind him, bookshelves, a closed door. Nothing moved. But the longer he stared, the more a strange pressure settled in the room, as if the air had thickened. As if something were waiting for permission. He stood, walked slowly toward it. His own eyes stared back, fractured, unblinking. And then, just for a moment, the light shifted behind him. The silhouette didn't match the room. A shoulder, a head, a figure. Not his. He turned. Nothing there. When he faced the mirror again, it was whole. The screen fades. Only his reflection remains. And behind it, the second face, smiling, patient, watching.